Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing nonprofit, educational, or personal use, tips a balance in favor of fair use. Okay, you guys. This is from Stephen A. Kent, Alberta.ca, as in Canada. Brainwashing in Scientology's Rehabilitation Project Force. This is including children's RPF. Revised version of a presentation at the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion, San Diego, California, November 7th, 1997, by Dr. Stephen Kent, University of Alberta, Canada, December 3rd, 1997. It's the second draft Microsoft Word version, 26 pages, dated August 98, Frederick L. Rice. Abstract. This study examines the confinement programs and camps that Scientology operates as supposedly rehabilitative facilities for deviant members, like children, of its elite Sea organization. These programs, known collectively as the Rehabilitation Force, RPF, put coerced participants through regimes. FBI, does that count as coercion? Through regimes of harsh physical punishment, forced self-confessions, it's auditing, social isolation, hard labor, and intense doctrinal study. Policies. All as part of leadership-designed efforts to regain members' ideological commitment. The confinement that participants experience, combined with forms of physical maltreatment, intensive ideological study, and forced confessions, allows social scientists to speak of the RPF as a brainwashing program. And this is the table of contents. Imagine he was sounding the alarm in 1997. It just has to be the secret societies. There's no other explanation that it's been allowed to go on as long as it has. Introduction. As an internal institution requiring total compliance from its confined participants, Scientology's Rehabilitation Project Force, RPF, is unique among contemporary ideological organizations operating in the Western world. While other organizations, such as the Family, the Children of God, have operated analogous programs, see Kent and Hall, 1997. The RPF has existed for over 20 years. Let's see, how long would it be now? 70 years or something? Established in January 1974, the RPF is a program of hard physical labor, forced confessions, and intense ideological study. Scientology insists that the program is designed to correct staff members, like children, problems in order to allow them to remain in its elite Sea Org and operate effectively in it. Critics insist that its purpose is to break the will of inmates in a manner that minimizes people's abilities to operate outside of the ideological constraints of the organization. They also argue that it provides Scientology with a labor force that receives almost no salaries. In any case, newspapers have reported on the program since at least 1984, with stories appearing in American, British, Danish, and German media. No academic accounts about it exist. However, even though its operation has direct bearing on an issue that many social scientists consider closed, the extent to which so-called new religions utilize brainwashing techniques on their members. This study argues that brainwashing, the systematic, scientific, and coercive elimination of the individuality of the mind of another, Shefflin and Opton, 1978-40, is a social scientifically appropriate concept for analyzing Scientology's imposition of reindoctrination programs within the confinement conditions experienced by inmates in the RPF, and its more severe extension, the RPF's RPF. It constructs this argument using primary documents that Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard either wrote or disseminated, as well as legal documents, interview transcripts, and media accounts. These documents and other items help identify Scientology's historical and organizational contexts out of which the RPF emerged, and they provide extended glimpses into actual RPF operations in several locations during particular periods. Of special interest to scholars is the study's use of Scientology publications from the mid-1950s and late 1960s that specifically discuss brainwashing techniques. Not only, therefore, is brainwashing an appropriate social scientific term to use when describing the RPF, but also it is a term that coincides with Scientology's own descriptions about forcing attitude change within confined environments. The brainwashing debate within the social sciences. The brainwashing debate in the social sciences took place mostly in the 1980s and early 1990s, when several professional organizations, professors, and scholars reacted against American courts accepting arguments that so-called new religions coerced members into conversion. Much of the sociological attack. Targeted psychologist Margaret Singer, Ph.D., who used a coercive persuasion brainwashing model to explain to courts how litigants joined and behaved in the groups they now were suing or defending against. The social scientific attacks concluded that the brainwashing term was valid only if the group in question used incarceration and physical maltreatment against members. See Anthony, 1990-304. In situations of uninformed consent, Youth and Griffith, 1992-93, this threefold requirement was a minimalist one, since a brainwashing program also would have to include an intense indoctrination program, coupled with personal confessions of past sins. Since neither the term supporters or detractors provided concrete evidence that even these minimalist activities uniformly occurred in most groups. Conversion activities, sociologists, and others concluded that brainwashing was not an appropriate term for describing how and why people join new or controversial religions. Of these requirements for using the brainwashing term, the single most important one was extreme physical coercion. Anthony and Robbins, 1992, 20, 25, N. 11. If such a condition existed, then it would allow both researchers and the courts to isolate brainwashing from other forms of coercive persuasion. As Robbins and Anthony concluded, without physical force as a boundary, there is no natural or objective cutting point as to when coercive persuasion is potent enough to overcome free will. As the brainwashing model implies, One crucial aspect of brainwashing in litigation has been an effort to specify when courts should allow individuals to use the concept as an excuse for deviant or illegal behavior. Researcher Dick Anthony, often working with associate Tom Robbins, developed much of the theory in this area and served as a consulting expert for lawyers, defending the Unification Church, Scientology, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON, Transcendental Meditation, and the Community Chapel Against Brainwashing. Allegations from disgruntled former members. Anthony and Robbins concluded that some attempts to utilize cult brainwashing to justify exemptions from American constitutional protections of religious presuppose that brainwashing is a form of hard determinism, which assumes that people are confined in ideological systems whose doctrines they must adopt. Human behavior explanations that postulate hard determinism, Anthony and Robbins claim, do not have general or even substantial acceptance in the relevant scientific communities, presumably sociology and psychology, and they are no longer taken seriously in the academic world. Consequently, in future attempts to assess the reassemblance of the theologies of religious groups to totalitarian ideologies, Anthony and Robbins hope that researchers will focus upon the free marketplace of ideas rather than upon increased governmental regulation of religious ideas or on the outcome of trials. In other words, these respected social scientists believe that research into whether religious groups brainwash has concluded that they do not do so, at least in a hard deterministic way. And this conclusion eliminates any need for discussion about governmental or legal intervention against religions on now disproven grounds that they brainwash their members into robots who commit deviant or criminal acts. RPF accounts in the courts and the media. Remarkably, however, throughout much of this debate, the popular press, some court documents, and at least one court appellate decision describe the forced confinement, maltreatment, and uniform consent that Sea Org members experienced in Scientology's RPF program and facilities. These descriptions were of a brainwashing program used to retain members rather than to obtain them. And perhaps for this reason, social scientists neglected to address these accounts. The first public statement about the RPF seems to have appeared in a January 25, 1980 affidavit by former member Tanya Burden of Las Vegas, Nevada, who described it as a Scientology concentration camp, and from which she escaped after having been in the program for around 3 months. Former member Jerry Armstrong supported Burden's general description of RPF conditions in a June 1982 affidavit, stating that he personally observed people, including Tanya Burden, in the RPF sleeping on floors, in storage rooms, in the boiler room, and in other subhuman conditions. No mention of the children, of course. Armstrong and 2 other former members, Laurel Sullivan and William Franks, spoke harshly about the RPF in a 1984 article in the Florida newspaper The Clearwater Sun. Franks called it a horrible thing, and Sullivan spoke about how rough the program was, having to work in 120-degree heat in the California desert with a severe case of colitis. In that same year, Great Britain's The Sunday Times magazine carried RPF descriptions from 3 more former members, Bent Corydon, Jay Hurwitz, and David Mayo. Hurwitz said that for the first 5 days, he and others were kept locked up under guard. We were brought our food, and we slept on the floor. We had to use the same toilet facilities in the presence of one another. Hurwitz was at the RPF near Gilman Hot Springs, California, in the summer of 1982, along with 18 other senior Scientology staffers. You know, prestigious executives. Also in 1984, a British court stated in a written decision that 2 years earlier, a woman in Scientology's English headquarters in East Grinstead was required to do at least 12 hours physical work a day, shifting bricks, emptying bins, etc., which aggravated a chronic back condition. The same story reappeared in the excellent study written by Englishman John Atack in 1990, and then in a newspaper article in 1994. Back in the United States, former member Don Larson told Forbes magazine in 1986 that he alone brought nearly 300 recalcitrant Scientologists to Rehabilitation Project forces at Scientology centers around the world over a period of 14 months, until his departure in late 1983. In these sadistic detention programs, staff members, like children, would be coerced into performing hard labor, eating leftovers out of buckets, and sleeping on floors. Some were reportedly kept against their will. Aren't they all? The year after the Forbes article, British biographer Russell Miller published his account of Hubbard's life, which contained nearly a dozen references to the RPF. A 1989 California appellate court decision indicated that, continuously for 3 weeks, former Scientologist Larry Wollersheim had been baited and badgered to enter the RPF, which the judge mentioned as evidence that Wollersheim accepted some of his auditing under, i.e. religious counseling, under threat of physical coercion. Did he have child auditors? The accounts of Frank Sullivan and former Sea Org staff member Hannah Whitfield appeared again in a series on the organization that the Los Angeles Times published in 1990. The article indicated that the RPF provides the church with a pool of labor to perform building maintenance, pull weeds, haul garbage, clean toilets, or do anything else church executives deem necessary for redemption. In the same year as the Los Angeles Times series, John Atack's thorough study of his former group contained significant RPF information. Finally, as recently as 1996, the RPF received attention in a Scientology study produced by former member Bent Corridon, himself having been an RPF inmate. Taken together, these legal and media sources strongly suggest that the RPF is a brainwashing facility according to the requirements that Anthony and Young and Griffith specified, but no social scientists pursued an investigation. Methodological issues. Perhaps one reason that social scientists have not examined the brainwashing dynamics of the RPF is because its study presents some unusual methodological obstacles that they must overcome in order to obtain appropriate information. First, Scientology has made out-of-court settlements with former RPF victims, and these settlements include agreements that they will not speak critically and publicly against the organization. I know of at least 5 people, 2 Americans, 2 Canadians, and 1 New Zealander, who entered into such agreements. Second, Scientology keeps confidential the key series of documents that define the RPF's operation. These documents appear in the Flag Order 3434 series, containing at least 56 is a Jesuit number, 56 separate issues, and only a small number of them have leaked out to researchers. Consequently, it remains impossible to trace the development of the RPF program through the organization's most relevant documents, which means that scholars' best information sources remain the accounts of former members. Third, former members who went through the RPF are difficult to find, and once found often are reluctant to speak with a researcher. The difficulty of finding former RPF inmates stems partly from the fact that the program's design is to feed repentant, and some would say emotionally broken, traumatized, Sea Org members back into the organization. Consequently, many potential informants remain in Scientology under threat of being either excommunicated or sent back into the RPF itself for talking negatively about their time in it. Moreover, as RPF participants, they spent countless and in some cases hundreds of hours confessing to alleged sins and crimes, and they fear that the organization would use these confessions against them if they were to talk. Indeed, the RPFers who complete their programs must write or sign a statement before they leave which praises the RPF and extols its virtues. Kind of like getting awards, isn't it? For all of these reasons, I did not attempt to interview active Scientologists who had been RPF inmates. Any criticism or negative statements that informants might have made about their experiences likely would have had dire consequences for them. For this study, therefore, I interviewed 6 people who had been on RPFs in different parts of the world. Plus, I collected court documents, affidavits, and correspondence from 14 more. In addition, I interviewed a person who had witnessed the RPF in operation, but had not participated in it, and collected accounts through personal correspondence, anonymous newsgroup postings, and legal documents from 8 additional individuals. I just want to interject. This professor did way more work than the FBI, the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, Department of Education, Child Protective Services, LAPD, Clearwater PD, Denver PD, Chicago PD. He did more work than any of them. In addition to the information by and from these 29 people, I collected primary Scientology documents and publications that discuss the RPF, along with accounts of it from the popular press. The picture that emerges from these sources show variations according to sometimes important details, but the overall picture concerning the operations of the program remains remarkably consistent. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and then I'll continue tomorrow with the ideational history. Peace. Link in the description.